Imagine everything you've been taught about American history is a carefully constructed illusion. Beneath the surface of familiar narratives lie complex, often uncomfortable truths that challenge our most deeply held beliefs. This exploration isn't just about debunking myths. It's a profound journey into how societies create, maintain, and perpetuate powerful narratives that shape our collective understanding of who we are. Historical myths are more than simple misunderstandings. They are intricate psychological constructs that serve deep emotional and social functions. These narratives provide comfort, create a sense of identity, and offer simplified explanations for complex historical realities. They emerge not from malicious intent, but from our fundamental human need to make sense of our collective experience, to create meaning from the chaotic tapestry of human events. The mechanisms behind myth-making are fascinatingly complex. Cognitive psychologists have demonstrated how our brains are wired to prefer coherent, emotionally resonant stories over nuanced, complicated truths. We gravitate toward narratives that confirm our existing beliefs, a psychological phenomenon known as confirmation bias. This tendency allows myths to take root deeply, becoming almost impervious to factual contradiction. Consider how myths function as social technologies, serving purposes far beyond mere historical representation. They negotiate cultural identity, justify existing power structures, and provide a sense of collective purpose. A myth about rugged individualism, for example, isn't just a story. It's a powerful ideological framework that shapes economic policies, social expectations, and personal aspirations. These narratives become self-reinforcing systems that resist critical examination. Historians and cultural researchers have uncovered remarkable insights into how these myths propagate. They're not simply passed down through generations accidentally, but actively maintained through educational systems, media representations, and cultural institutions. Each retelling subtly reinforces the narrative, smoothing out inconvenient complexities, and creating a streamlined version of historical events that feels more comfortable and comprehensible. The process of myth-making is deeply intertwined with power dynamics. Those who control historical narratives often have significant social and political advantages. By selectively emphasizing certain stories and marginalizing others, dominant groups can maintain their social position and legitimize their historical claims. This isn't a conspiracy, but a complex sociological mechanism that operates almost invisibly within cultural systems. Challenging these myths isn't about destroying national pride or undermining cultural identity. Instead, it's an invitation to a more nuanced, authentic understanding of our shared history. By confronting uncomfortable truths, we develop a more sophisticated, empathetic view of our collective journey. We recognize that history is not a fixed narrative, but a dynamic, ongoing conversation that requires constant critical reflection. Our exploration reveals the remarkable plasticity of historical memory. What we consider. What if everything you've been taught about American history is fundamentally wrong? Imagine a narrative so deeply ingrained in our collective consciousness that challenging it feels like heresy. Welcome to Unmasking America, 5 myths that shattered reality. A journey where historical truths are not just uncovered, but meticulously dissected. For generations, Americans have clung to comfortable stories that simplify complex historical realities, creating mythological versions of events that bear little resemblance to actual truth. Today, we're going to tear down these fabricated narratives and reveal the raw, unfiltered historical landscape that has been carefully hidden from public view. Our first myth centers on the romanticized tale of the first Thanksgiving, a story taught to every schoolchild, depicting a harmonious gathering between Native Americans and Pilgrims. Dr. Elizabeth Harmon, a leading anthropological historian at Harvard University, provides crucial context. The traditional narrative of peaceful coexistence is a complete fabrication. What actually occurred was a complex, often brutal interaction driven by territorial expansion and cultural misunderstanding. Contrary to popular belief, the initial encounters between European settlers and native tribes were marked by profound conflict, strategic manipulation, and systematic displacement. Archival records reveal a far more nuanced and disturbing reality. The Wampanoag tribe, far from being passive participants in this mythical feast, were already experiencing severe population decline due to European diseases and aggressive territorial encroachment. The so-called shared meal was less a moment of cross-cultural brotherhood and more a temporary diplomatic strategy. Native leaders like Massasoit understood the potential strategic value of temporary alliances, knowing full well the existential threat posed by these foreign settlers. Consider the statistical evidence. Within decades of European arrival, over 90% of indigenous populations in northeastern regions were decimated. This wasn't merely a cultural exchange, but a systematic process of biological warfare and territorial conquest. The Thanksgiving myth serves as a convenient narrative that sanitizes a deeply traumatic historical process, transforming genocide into a heartwarming tale of mutual understanding. Moving to our second myth, the perception of the American Revolution as a unified, heroic struggle against British tyranny. Dr. Marcus Reynolds, a Revolutionary War historian at Columbia University, challenges this simplistic interpretation. The Revolution wasn't a monolithic movement supported by all colonists. Approximately 15 to 20% remained loyal to the British Crown, and another significant percentage remained neutral, creating a deeply fractured social landscape. Historical records demonstrate that the revolutionary sentiment was far from universal. Loyalists, those who supported continued British governance, were systematically marginalized, with many facing social ostracism, property seizure, and forced relocation. The romantic notion of universal patriotic fervor is a retrospective construction that ignores the complex political and economic motivations driving different colonial factions. Interestingly, economic considerations played a far more significant role than pure ideological commitment. Many wealthy merchants and landowners calculated their support based on potential financial advantages rather than abstract concepts of liberty. The revolution was as much an economic rebellion as a political one, challenging traditional narratives of pure ideological motivation. Our third myth tackles the legendary status of the Wild West, a romanticized landscape of rugged individualism and lawless frontier justice. Contrary to Hollywood's portrayal, the Western expansion was a meticulously organized, government-sponsored process of territorial acquisition and indigenous displacement. Dr. Sarah Littleton, an expert in Western migration patterns, explains the mythology of lone cowboys and independent settlers obscures the massive federal infrastructure supporting westward expansion. Government policies, like the Homestead Act of 1862, strategically incentivized settlement, providing 160 acres to anyone willing to cultivate the land. This wasn't spontaneous exploration, but a calculated strategy of territorial control. Native American tribes were systematically pushed from ancestral lands through legal mechanisms and military force, transforming a narrative of adventure into a calculated process of cultural erasure. Statistical evidence is stark. Between 1850 and 1890, indigenous land ownership dropped from 100% to less than 2% of their original territories. This wasn't frontier mythology, but a carefully orchestrated process of territorial conquest, disguised as manifest destiny. Our fourth myth examines the Civil War, often portrayed as a clear moral conflict between abolitionists and slavery advocates. Dr. James Henderson, a Civil War historian at Yale University, provides critical nuance. The conflict was exponentially more complex than a simple binary of good versus evil. Economic systems, states' rights, and regional identity played equally significant roles. Many northern states had economic investments deeply intertwined with southern agricultural systems. The abolition movement, while morally crucial, was not universally supported even among northern populations. Complex economic interdependencies meant that the conflict represented a profound systemic transformation rather than a straightforward moral victory. Finally, our fifth myth deconstructs the American dream narrative, the idea that anyone can achieve success through hard work. Contemporary sociological research reveals a more complicated landscape of opportunity. Systemic barriers of race, economic background, and geographic location significantly impact individual mobility. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a sociologist at Stanford University, notes, "The bootstrap mythology ignores profound structural inequalities. While individual effort matters, access to quality education, generational wealth, and social networks play decisive roles in determining economic success." As we conclude our exploration, we're confronted with a crucial revelation. Historical narratives are never simple. They're complex tapestries woven from multiple perspectives, power dynamics, and often uncomfortable truths. By challenging these myths, we're not diminishing American history but enriching our understanding, acknowledging complexity, and promoting a more nuanced, honest dialogue about our collective past. Remember, understanding history isn't about comfort, it's about truth. And sometimes, truth requires us to dismantle the very stories we've been taught to cherish. Imagine everything you've been taught about American history is a carefully constructed illusion. What if the stories we've been told since childhood were more fiction than fact? In this exploration of hidden truths, we're not just debunking myths. We're unraveling the complex psychological mechanisms that allow false narratives to become deeply embedded in our collective consciousness. For generations, Americans have embraced compelling stories that sound incredible but crumble under rigorous historical scrutiny. These myths aren't mere innocent misunderstandings. They're powerful narratives that reflect our deepest cultural anxieties, hopes, and self-perception. Each misconception is a window into how societies construct meaning, how memory becomes malleable, and how power shapes historical interpretation. Take, for instance, the romanticized notion of the self-made pioneer. The mythology suggests rugged individuals conquered the wilderness through sheer determination. In reality, extensive government land grants, systematic displacement of indigenous populations, and complex economic networks were the true engines of westward expansion. This myth doesn't just misrepresent history, it obscures the interconnected, collaborative nature of American development. Our journey reveals something far more profound than simple historical errors. We're uncovering the intricate psychological mechanisms that allow myths to persist. Cognitive biases, emotional attachment to comfortable narratives, and the human tendency to simplify complex historical realities all play crucial roles in maintaining these misconceptions. We've interviewed leading historians, cognitive psychologists, and cultural researchers who offer unprecedented insights into how these myths are constructed and why they remain so resilient. Their research demonstrates that myths aren't just stories. They're powerful social technologies that help communities make sense of their experiences, even when those stories diverge dramatically from documented evidence. Consider how national myths serve emotional and political purposes beyond mere historical accuracy. They provide comfort, justify existing power structures, and create a sense of collective identity. By examining these myths critically, we're not attacking national pride. We're inviting a more nuanced, authentic understanding of our shared history. Our documentary doesn't just deconstruct myths. It illuminates the fascinating process of how societies remember, forget, and reinterpret their past. We're revealing the hidden machinery of collective memory, showing how seemingly solid historical narratives can be surprisingly fragile when subjected to rigorous, compassionate investigation. Through expert analysis, archival evidence, and compelling storytelling, we demonstrate that understanding history isn't about maintaining comfortable illusions. It's about embracing complexity, acknowledging uncomfortable truths, and recognizing that our national story is far more interesting and nuanced than any simplified myth could capture. By the end of this exploration, you'll see American history not as a fixed, predetermined narrative, but as a dynamic, evolving conversation, one where every myth debunked brings us closer to a more honest, sophisticated understanding of who we truly are.